fairly familiar to many of us. We have been going through the book of Exodus, the story of Exodus, and today we are landing on the 10 Commandments. Or if you want to get really technical, does anybody know the term that's used for the 10 Commandments in like the more theological term? They're called the Decalogue, which simply just means the 10 words. And honestly, I think it's kind of fitting that we're getting to them right now. We're 6 weeks into this series because the 10 Commandments might be some of the most familiar words in the Bible, but we often hear them as these like standalone rules instead of part of a larger story in the book of Exodus. And so you actually may have heard, I think it was last year, 2025, Texas recently passed a law requiring the 10 Commandments to be displayed in public school classrooms. Supporters have kind of celebrated this win for religious freedom, and there may be differing views on that within this room, but just I wanted to say, whatever you think about the law itself, here's what I find interesting. The version they're required to display begins, "I am the Lord thy God," and then it goes straight into, "Thou shalt not have any other gods before me." But it leaves something extremely important out. The actual passage says, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." And I mean, maybe that feels like a small thing, but as we've been going through Exodus, we've been talking about how there's just this constant reminder to look back, to remember, and the importance that our story plays in the way that we consider how we're moving forward, how we're journeying, how we are becoming. And so the way that we hear that, when we actually read that entire line, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery," I think changes the tone of everything that comes next. Because without that line, the 10 Commandments can just sound like a list of rules from a God who shows up and starts telling everyone what to do. And I think for people that have no relationship with Jesus, if they are in the school system and that list is on the wall, that's all it is, right? It's just a list from a God who was trying to control everybody and tell them what to do. But that's not how the story goes. By the time Israel gets to the mountain, God has already heard their cries. God has already confronted Pharaoh. God has already brought them through the water, fed them through the wilderness, and stayed with them even when they have struggled to trust. And so before God tells Israel what to do, God reminds them of what God has already done. And that is exactly why we're talking about these words at this point in this series. Because if we forget Pharaoh, and we forget about the midwives, and we forget about the plagues and the water and the wilderness, if we forget all of that, then these rules are literally just rules. It's a checklist. But before the commands were ever set in stone, they were set in a story. And the story changes the way that we hear them. God doesn't say, "Obey these commands, and then I'll rescue you." God says, "I have already rescued you. Now let me show you how to live free." So today I want to put these words back into their story and ask what kind of people they're meant to help us become. Because at the heart of it all, this is still a story about how we are learning to live free. So let's start in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1 together. It says this, "And God spoke all of these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." So before God tells Israel what to do, God reminds them of what God has already done. "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." Now, what's interesting is that the Bible doesn't actually number these for us. It's not like you open up Exodus and it says command number 1, command number 2. And so different Jewish and Christian traditions have divided them up into slightly different ways. But in Jewish tradition, these opening words are counted. So these opening words, this line, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery," these opening words are counted as the first of the 10 words. The first of not necessarily the commandments. Remember, we said they are called the 10 words. This is the first of them, which means that before Israel is given a single command, they are reminded of the God who has already set them free. And so everything that comes next is meant to be heard in the voice of that God, the God who brings freedom, the God who liberates. the God who brings healing and restoration. And I mean, this is a very different starting point than if you were just to sit down and open up these list of rules and read them that way. And I think that really matters. These words aren't how Israel gets out of Egypt. They're about learning how to live once they're out and how to make sure that they don't end up back in Egypt all over again. There's a guy by the name of Steve Chalk in his book, The Art of Living. Tells this really good story that I like that illustrates this for us. So he's on the radio, and he's in this debate on BVC. But the presenter at one point is kind of like antagonistic towards religion. And so she turns on him and she asks, why is your God so miserable? Right? Like, I mean, he's such a downer about everything. It's kind of like pathetic, actually, for a supposed God of the universe to care about all of that, isn't it? Like, what's his deal? Don't commit adultery, like all this kind of stuff. Like, what's his problem? Why is he trying to invade our lives and tell us what to do? And Chalk responds and he says, like, is that true? Does God really say that? Does God actually say, like, don't commit adultery? She's like, well, of course. Completely exasperated. It's right there in the 10 Commandments. And at that point, Chalk says, oh, that's what you're talking about. I just didn't recognize it because of the tone. I guess I've never heard it that way. And so you can appreciate maybe the dry British sense of humor there, but the point is that tone matters. These aren't just some random restrictions from a miserable God who likes telling people what they can and can't do. They are meant to protect life. They are meant to protect relationships and truth and rest, the things that a community needs in order to flourish. And they come from a God who has already heard Israel in their oppression, has already come looking for them, and already led them into freedom. Israel spent generations living under Pharaoh's rules, and now God is teaching them how to be a community that doesn't just build another Egypt, that doesn't just build another empire. Centuries later, Jesus will read these words in the same direction. In the Sermon on the Mount, he says this, you have heard that it was said, you shall not murder. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister is subject to judgment. So Jesus isn't just like throwing out this law here in this moment, saying that was the old way, but now I've got something better. He's reading these words from within his own Jewish tradition, and he's saying, what kind of people are these words helping us to become? Because you can go your whole life without murdering anyone. I think most of us could probably say we haven't, and still allow anger and hatred to eat away at you. You can technically follow the command without ever letting it change who you're becoming. So the point isn't just to stay within the lines. The point is to let the words shape the kind of people that we're becoming. God is teaching a people who have been set free how to live. And this brings us back to what we called them at the beginning, the 10 words. Because these aren't 10 disconnected rules. Together, they begin to describe a whole way of life, a community where people are allowed to rest, where life is protected, where relationships matter, and nobody builds their life by taking from or lying about their neighbor. So let's look at how these words unfold. This is going to sound familiar for many of us, but this is the way that we usually just divide them. They go something like this. Have no other gods before me. Do not make an idol. Do not use God's name in vain. Remember the Sabbath. Honor your parents. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Do not covet what belongs to your neighbor. Now, we're obviously not going to take the time to explore all 10 of these individually today, but something I want us to notice is that when we get to that final one, something changes. And I think it helps us see what all of these words are trying to do. It says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female slave, his ox or his donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, before we go any further, we should probably acknowledge that this is an ancient text. It is addressed to the male head of a household, and it lists a wife and enslaved people alongside of the possessions of that household. And so I don't want to just pretend that that's not there. And we shouldn't pretend that getting Israel out of Egypt immediately got every trace of Egypt out of Israel. Freedom had come, but there was still a lot in their world and in them that God's freedom hadn't yet transformed. Make sense? But notice who the command confronts. It confronts the person who has enough power to look at somebody else's life and think, I want that. I should be able to take that. But there's something else that makes this word different. Most of the commands deal with actions we can actually see. I mean, we can identify theft, we can identify false testimony, we can identify murder, we can identify adultery. But coveting takes us underneath the action. It asks what is happening inside of us before we ever do anything. And this is where things get a little tricky for us because, I mean, can you really command someone to not feel something? Like, what if envy just shows up? What if somebody else has, what if I see something somebody else has, and before I've even thought about it, I want it? Have I already broken the command? Or maybe coveting isn't the feeling that first shows up. Maybe it's what we do with it. When instead of letting go, we keep coming back to it, we keep feeding it, we start convincing ourselves that our lives would be way better if what they had was ours. Jewish interpreters wrestled with this question. Some distinguish between a desire that appears in the mind and coveting that begins reaching out to possess someone or something else. One interpretation draws a progression, this progression of desire leading to coveting, eventually leading to taking. The prophet Micah describes powerful people in exactly this way. They covet fields and they seize them. They covet and they take. They desire, they covet, and they take. And so this final word is not condemning every passing desire. It's warning us about the desires that we entertain, about the desires that we feed, and the desires that we eventually organize our lives around. You know, most of us aren't necessarily staring across the fence at our neighbor's ox or their donkey, coveting it. But we do look, I need what someone else has in order to be happy, to be content. And that makes me wonder, is this final word that if this final word might be more than just a warning, what if it isn't just a command, but also a promise? Like, what if God is saying that as these words shape Israel's life together, they can gradually free people from the need to possess everything that they see? And so maybe the shape of the 10 words sounds something like this. This is kind of a paraphrase. Remember the God who brought you out of slavery. Don't try to shrink that God down into something you can control. Don't use God's name just to get what you want, and learn how to rest, not just for yourself, but in a way that allows the people around you to rest well too. Protect life. Honor your relationships. Do not take what belongs to your neighbor. Don't distort the truth to harm them. And as this way of life shapes you, perhaps you will gradually become less controlled by the need to possess what someone else has. God has brought Israel out of Egypt. Now, God begins the long work of bringing Egypt out of Israel, because Egypt isn't just a place that they have left behind, right? We've been talking about this throughout this series. Egypt is a way of living. Empire is a way of living. It's the belief that there is never enough, that power gives you the right to take, and that other people exist to give you what you want. And I think eventually this isn't only about stuff. It starts to affect the way that we see people, the way that we interact with people. Because we can look at another person and without even realizing it, stop seeing them as a whole person. Seeing them as a person to serve my purposes, to serve my desires, to serve my needs. Instead, we start seeing them for what they might give us or how they might make us feel. And I mean, if you think about it, that sounds a lot like Egypt. People become valuable as slaves because of what you can produce or what they can produce for you, what you can get out of them. Which brings us back to the way Jesus reads these words. Earlier, we saw him move from murder to anger and contempt underneath it. When he turns to adultery, he does something similar. He says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Now, the language translated here as looks lustfully carries the sense of looking in order to desire or to covet. And actually, it's the same language that's used in this 10th commandment, "You shall not covet." So Jesus may be connecting these two words, but he isn't just talking about the act of adultery. He's asking what happens underneath it, the desire to possess another person. So I don't think Jesus is saying that simply noticing someone is attractive is the problem. That's a normal thing. Recognizing beauty. The problem is what happens when we stop seeing them as a whole person and start seeing them mainly in terms of what we want from them. And that's one of the things that coveting can do. It can slowly turn another person, their life, their body, their relationships, their possessions, into something we imagine to be ours. And this is where I think we can begin to hear a promise within the command, "You shall not covet." You shall not covet is still a command, but within the larger story of Exodus, I think it points us towards the kind of freedom that God wants to bring. Freedom from the kind of desire that keeps us from seeing and loving other people as whole human beings. So I don't think the answer is to just stop wanting anything, right? I mean, desire isn't necessarily bad. It's part of being human, but maybe freedom looks more like being able to celebrate something good in somebody else's life without treating it as an accusation against your own. Maybe it means being able to say, "That's beautiful," or "This is beautiful, and you know what? I don't need it to be mine." Maybe it means believing that somebody else's flourishing doesn't come at the expense of yours. Like they're assuming that because they're doing well, that they're taking something from you, something you deserve or something that you want. Maybe it means learning slowly to receive life, your own life as a gift. So maybe I wonder if the invitation is this week as we look at this passage, simply to notice the moment someone else's life starts to feel like a judgment on yours. To notice what you keep looking at, comparing, or imagining would finally make you enough. So I want to just sit with that for a moment, because I think this is an important one. If you were to fill in this blank, if I only had blank, then I would be okay. What does that blank look like for you? You don't need to say it out loud, but I just want us to pay attention to this morning. Is it, if I only had enough money in the bank, if I only had that thing, if I only had that relationship, then I'd be okay. What does it look like for you? Just take a moment and sit with that. When you put your finger on it, maybe it's something really obvious. Maybe it's just something that God's Spirit has just kind of put his finger on for you in this moment. But instead of shaming yourself for it, bring it honestly before God. Ask God to show you what fear might be underneath that thing and what it might look like to loosen your grip on it. Because freedom usually begins by telling the truth about what has kind of been running our lives. This is what changes when we remember the story. The commands aren't this ladder that we climb. so that God will come and rescue us. They are a response to the salvation that has already come looking for us. And so maybe your experience of Christianity has been about rules, has been about judgment and checklists. Maybe faith has felt like more of a burden placed on your shoulders by people who claim to speak for God. And if that's the case, Exodus is asking us to listen again, not only to the words, but to the voice speaking them. Not just to look at the 10 Commandments as a list of rules, but looking to the voice who gave them. This is the God who hears people when they cry out, the God who confronts whatever is holding them captive, the God who makes a way through water and provides food in the wilderness and stays with them when they're still learning how to trust, and doesn't give up on them when they fail over and over and over again. Now this God says, don't go back to that. I've brought you out of Egypt. I've brought you out of slavery, out of bondage, out of oppression, into this place of freedom. This is how you should live, because this is what a free life looks like. Don't go back to Egypt. Don't go back to the oppression that you were under before. Live as somebody who is new, who is free. Live as someone who remembers how faithful I've been to you along your journey. And in addition to that, don't become Pharaoh to somebody else, controlling and oppressing and taking from them whatever you can get. Protect life. Tell the truth. Honor your relationships. Make room for rest. Resist the desire to have what belongs to someone else or to treat people as though they exist for you. Because God isn't only just setting us free from something. God is setting us free for something. To love God, to live well with one another, and believe that there is enough, that we have been given everything we need from a God who sees us and loves us. That we don't have to take from someone else in order to be okay. Again, before the commands were ever set in stone, they were set in a story. And the story has always been about a God who is absolutely determined to lead people out of slavery and into freedom. That's what we find in this story. Would you pray with me? God, you are the one who hears us, who comes looking for us, and who leads us into freedom. And today, we confess that even after you have brought us out of Egypt, there can still be a lot of Egypt left in us. We compare ourselves. We look at somebody else's life and imagine what they have is somehow necessary for us to be okay. We convince ourselves that there isn't enough, and sometimes we look at people more for what they can give us instead of someone who is created in your image. So help us pay attention to what is happening inside us, God. When somebody else's life starts becoming the measurement for ours, remind us that their flourishing is not a threat to us. Help us to believe that there is enough. Teach us to receive our own lives as gifts, to celebrate what is good in the lives of others, and to see people as whole human beings. People to love, not a thing to possess. Thank you that your freedom doesn't depend on us getting everything right. That you have already come looking for us, and that you're not waiting for us to check a bunch of boxes before you're willing to accept us, to receive us. So God, we ask that you would keep doing that work in us. Keep drawing the Egypt out of us, and keep making us more like you, Lord. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Amen. It's moments like these that I think are really important in community. I don't know what your exposure to church has been like, but I think there are a lot of church cultures where we feel the need to kind of like keep our true selves and what's going on kind of just below the surface. And when we put a question up here like this, where we filled in the blank, if I only had blank, then I would be okay. I think it's extremely important for us in community to be transparent about those things, to talk about the things that are keeping us from being okay. Talking about the desires that we have that are keeping us from really experiencing all that God has for us. And so these relationships that we have within community are so important. And I just want to encourage you to find people within this community, find other believers who would pray alongside you, but ask for help. Like that is one of the most important things within community, is for us to set our pride aside and to be vulnerable with one another, to ask for help, to ask for prayer, and ask for like that level of accountability, and just be like, hey, like I can't do this on my own. Would you help me? I think that's something that we can get behind, that we can support and be excited about within this community. So please, like, I know it takes courage to do that, and it's a lot easier just to kind of like pull back and protect ourselves in that way. It feels like we're doing. But as we've been talking about, that actually just leads to more oppression, because we just keep putting more and more weight on our shoulders when we do that. The freedom is found when we actually exist when we can do this together well in community. And so I hope that's something that we can continue working towards together, not just necessarily in this space, but in all of our lives together. So I just want to encourage you with that. We love you guys. If there's any questions or thoughts about today, if there's anything you'd like me to pray for with you, please don't hesitate to come ask. And we look forward to seeing you throughout this week potentially, and next Sunday as well. So blessings. We'll talk soon.
He is my joy, my righteousness and